All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Stories of Freedom podcast. Kayla's here again.
Hey, guys.
So, excited to get going again today. Things went pretty well, I thought, and we got a lot of good feedback. So, have another guest lined up probably within the next couple of weeks once we have Justin on and stuff. So, but today I'm going to go ahead and share my testimony, which I'll get into here in a little bit. Did want to share some exciting things, though. We have background music now. I don't know if it's on this recording or not because I haven't got to the editing yet. But we did get some music made from us from Donnie that plays the guitar up there. So hopefully it's mixed in. If not, it will be soon. But yeah, so it's Super Bowl Sunday today.
Woo.
You're not a Super Bowl or a football fan.
Do the sports things. Do the football things. I go for the food.
Yeah. My team's not there, so but I'm still going to watch the game. I like football.
Yeah.
So
Justin's a Charger fan, so they're never there.
Yeah.
Hopefully he doesn't listen to this one.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Niner fan, so we got work to do too. Although we are getting the backup quarterback for the Patriots, so maybe we'll have some better luck with him. Seem to have better luck with him. But anyway, I'm not going to bore you with that since you're not a football fan.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for baseball.
Yeah, see, and I don't really watch much baseball, so there's, sorry.
Man, thought we were friends, Chris.
Who's your team in baseball?
Giants.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not like a bandwagon fan. Like, I've been a fan my whole life, even when they sucked in the 90s. So, like I'm a legit Giants fan.
See, that's when I was a Giants fan, was in the 90s. Because I was on, in baseball, and that's who I watched was the Giants. But I don't really follow it anymore. So. Yeah. But yeah, I guess I'll go through
Just dive right in.
Might as well, right? So as I was kind of going through my testimony and figuring out how I wanted to do this, there's a couple parts of it, and there was one that happened more recent that I really did want to share, but it just there's a lot to it. I'm still trying to figure some of it out, and it was getting to be really long and complicated, and I got thinking that maybe it would be a better idea anyway if I just shared more my background of my Christian faith and how I got started. So I grew up in church as far back as I can remember. I've been going to church. I grew up in a nice Christian home, two loving parents. They provided a really good life for me and a really good example. They're getting ready to celebrate 39 years of marriage next month, so
that's awesome.
That's pretty cool. And nice neighborhood, all that stuff. I just had a really good childhood growing up, and a lot of good influences in my life. And growing up in church, the church that I went to was a Southern Baptist church, so it was pretty conservative and traditional, but it really helped me lay a good foundation for my faith. And at that church, they had a baptismal that was on the back wall behind the stage, and it was elevated, and because they had that, they did baptisms regularly.
Oh, cool. I
think it was about once every quarter or so that they did baptisms, if I can remember right, and they would just take everybody. They did altar call every Sunday, and everybody that had accepted Christ, in that time frame, they got baptized. And I always enjoyed that as a kid, watching them get baptized. People get really excited about the baptisms. They go in there with the pastor, and he dunks them underwater, and then they come up happy, and the congregation cheers. As a kid, I was just like, this is cool,
Yeah.
So I knew that someday I would get baptized, and then at some point, my sister got baptized, and she's 3 years older than me. I don't know how old she was or how old I was. I don't remember that, but I was pretty young, and she got baptized. And I told my parents that I wanted to get baptized too, because she was getting baptized. So they asked me why I wanted to get baptized and if I knew what it meant. And I just told them it looked like fun. I really had no idea what it meant, And they said, well, wait till you can tell us what it means, and you know what decision you're making when you're getting baptized. So I said okay. And a few years later, I'm not sure exactly how much later, I just know that when I was 9 years old, I understood the story. I understood the gospel. I knew that I was a sinner. I did things that weren't right, and every time I did that, that was sin, and it separated me from God. Jesus came, died on the cross to take that penalty, and if I chose to follow him and ask God to forgive me, then I'd be saved. So I told my parents that I knew what it meant, and I was ready to make a decision to follow God the rest of my life. And they said okay. So on that Sunday, I went forward to the altar call, prayed the prayer, and then got set up for the baptism. And I remember the date only because it was on Palm Sunday, and I know I was 9 years old. So it was April 4th, 1993. And I got baptized. And after that, I really did take my faith seriously, even at a young age. I should say I took that commitment seriously. I was very vocal about my faith, especially going into middle school. That's where I became the most vocal. And I was wearing, I did everything that I thought Christians were supposed to do. I wore the Christian t-shirts. I listened to Christian music. My friends were all getting into punk rock and rock music and grunge, and I'm listening to Christian rock music, because I'm like, I'm a Christian. That's what I got to do.
Right.
And I wore, like I said, the Christian shirts, and I even decided I want to be a pastor, and just, I'm like, this is what a Christian's supposed to do, right?
Right.
And I just follow those examples or follow that as my example. And I was thinking about it too, and I remember back then there was that saying, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I pretty much lived by that, but I think I changed it to, mentally, had it changed to WWCD or, something along those lines, like what would a good Christian do, And that's all everything I did in my life, it was about that. I even had a friend of mine who I invited to church all the time, and he didn't want to come, and he always kind of picked on me for being a Christian, although later on he ended up becoming a Christian, which was pretty cool. But, he always picked on me and stuff for it, and for his birthday, I decided to get him I thought the right thing to do would be get him a New Testament pocket Bible, which, he wasn't excited about at all.
He's like, what is this?
That's what I got to do, right? So, just things like that. That was really how I was growing up. And actually, my sister, I mentioned she's a couple years older than me. She's the smart one of the family. And she noticed something. I was probably in about 8th grade at this time. And she noticed, so she would have probably been about a junior in high school. And she noticed this stuff. She noticed that I was kind of going through the emotions, and I was kind of living out a Christian life. But she was kind of, concerned, I guess, and she came up to me and she was like, I'm glad to see that you're very, into, going to church and being a Christian, but I just want to make sure that you're more, you're being sincere about it, because it almost at times seems like it's kind of a show.
Right.
And I was young and I didn't understand. I'm just thinking, no, I'm doing what a Christian should do. Yeah. Yep. Sorry, we just got distracted there. But anyway, so, and later on I realized she figured it out. I mean, she saw it in me, and she was trying to help me and stuff. So, but that's that. As I got a little older, and going into high school, I toned down quite a bit. I wasn't as vocal. It was the same people in high school that I went to middle school with, so they knew, and even the kids that kind of migrated into that school, they knew. I did make my faith known, but I didn't always wear the Christian shirts. I started listening to secular music also, and and I wasn't as vocal about it. But I still held that core belief. I got really plugged into my youth group, and went to all the youth events and all the camps and all that stuff, And then as I graduated high school, I moved to Pennsylvania. I went out there for school, and at the year that I was out there, I did one semester, and I actually started kind of pulling away from God when I was out there. I had a great life, a great childhood growing up. It was pretty sheltered though, and I think when I got out there and I was 3,000 miles away from home, and I had a little bit of freedom, it kind of got the best of me. And I mean, I didn't get into a lot of trouble or anything like that. I mean, for the most part, I was living with my grandparents and stuff, but That was in 2001 is when I graduated, and that's when the movie Fast and Furious came out, and I had a little Honda Civic, and basically it became my world, and it all my money went to that stupid car. And I started, it was a smaller town, so in that town there wasn't a whole lot to do, and the car scene was really big at that time. So downtown they had probably about a mile loop downtown, and every night, and not just Friday and Saturdays, even though they're the busiest, every night people would go down there and they would cruise. So I went down there and I started meeting a lot of people and stuff. They were into that scene. I got into street racing. As much as you can for a car that, the Honda Civic, it's not really that fast, but I still was racing around town, and and just kind of took that probably farther than I should have.
Right.
And I was going to church out there, and I did have friends that were in the same car club as I was in that were going to that church, and we all just kind of went into that scene together. And I met a lot of people when I was cruising and hanging out with them that I probably shouldn't have spent as much time as I did with them, because they really were not a great influence, and they kind of pulled me away. So after being out there for a year, I was still planning on being out there longer, and I came out back to Sacramento just to visit for a week. And when I was out there, I went to the church that I had started going to before I left. So the church that I grew up into, I left at the end of my junior year, going into my senior year, because there were some things that happened in that church, and the pastor left, the youth pastor left, and I saw some really petty things happening. And I found a church closer to my house that I started going to. And I got connected into that youth group, and then I moved to Pennsylvania, and then when I came back, I went back to that church that I had started going to before I left, a year before I left, and I realized how far away from God I had actually fallen. I mean, I was there, and I just heard God talk to me, and I realized I am not in the same place I was last year. I am, doing things that I should not be doing. I'm hanging out with people I shouldn't be hanging out with. I mean, not that we can't have friends that aren't Christians or that aren't necessarily good examples, but I was letting them influence me too much. And I just realized that my heart wasn't in the right place. So I decided I better move back home. And I came back home, and a month later I moved back. Got really plugged into that church. There was a youth pastor. They got a new youth pastor at that church when I was in Pennsylvania. He was doing a good job leading the youth group. He had taken everybody that had graduated in 2001 with me and helped them form a college group. So they now had a college group at that church, which they didn't have when I left. And the college group really helped out with high schoolers. And my wife now, Renee, she had started going to that church the year that I had during that time that I left, and she was part of a bunch of friends that graduated high school together that started going there, and that's where we really started talking. And I met her like a year before that, about a year and a half before that, but that's where we really started to get to know each other, and things progressed. Right. And we started hanging out a lot. She was helping me get closer to God. She was kind of coming from more of a Catholic background, discovering her faith, now as a Christian, and we were kind of going through that together. We had a really good friend, a mutual friend that we all kind of hung out together, and then everything was headed in the right direction. And then, just to make a long story short, the youth pastor that kind of was heading all this up decided he felt called to leave the church to go start a new one, which was great. But the way he went about it and the way he picked people to come with him, I don't believe it was necessarily the right way to do it. Right. And he took a lot of people that were close and a lot of friends. He split them up and he had them kind of keep things from each other. And it really affected, it hurt a lot of relationships. And when we went to him and we confronted him about it politely, we just sat down, we talked to him about it, told him how we felt everything was going, and, never did we think any of it was intentional necessarily, but when we were trying to explain to him, what our thoughts on it, he basically told us we were being selfish and just kind of made us feel like really low.
Right.
And it really, I don't want to get into the whole story. There's a lot to that. But it was the first time after going to church that I had been burnt by somebody in the church, and not just somebody, but a leader, a youth pastor that was going to go start a church and be a pastor. He was somebody that I looked up to, and I was trying to model my faith and my Christianity after him. And then that happens, and then it kind of made me flash back to when I left the other church, and after the pastor and the youth pastor left, and some other leaders stepped in and started, like I said, being kind of petty, and that's another long story in itself.
Right.
I didn't get burned specifically in that, but I just saw things that I was kind of hypocritical. I mean, you hear that about the church, right?
Yeah, it just didn't sit well, and
Yeah. So I was like, I've got to really think about this for a minute, because I don't really like the way some of these leaders are doing things in the church. And I stopped going for about 6 months, and I still believed in God. I still I still called myself a Christian, but I really had to reevaluate what it meant to be a Christian and what I thought of the church, because I really didn't have much faith in the church anymore, or the people in the church. And I was angry with everything that had happened. So and like I said, all those stereotypes of being hypocrites and this and that was flashing through my head. So I started going back through my whole life and just thinking of all the things I had learned and all the conversations I had had with these leaders, and just started second-guessing everything, figuring out if I wanted to be a part of it, if I wanted to go back to church. I felt like I did want to at some point go back to church, but I didn't know how, where to go, where to begin, how I was going to address these, issues and stuff. And, Renee and I, we still talked through it, and we still prayed together and stuff, but it was a rough about 6 months. And then at some point, and then our friend too, he was kind of stuck with us as well during that time, and eventually he kind of faded away. It kind of pushed him out. And so eventually, about 6 months later, I felt God tell me one day when I was just kind of praying about it and trying to figure out what was going on, that the reason why I was hurt so bad by it is because my faith was in the wrong place. All these years I'd grown up going to church, and I knew the stories, I knew the Bible, I knew all these things, and I knew what a Christian was supposed to do, but I didn't really. My faith was in the church. It was in the pastor, the youth pastor. Even my parents. I basically took my faith and my identity as a Christian and tried to mold it around what I thought a Christian was supposed to be. And there wasn't a whole lot of actual, communication with God and a relationship with God. And actually, I probably had more communication and more relationship with God in those 6 months when I wasn't going to church, because I had nowhere else to turn and no one else to look for. So even though I wrestled with my faith and struggled with it, it was probably the first time I actually really talked to God on the level that I did and listened to God. So I was like, all right, I guess we should probably start going back to church. And there was a church that the college group had been going to, that they at our church, it was closer to home. They went to a different church Sunday nights and were part of a larger like college group. So we didn't want to go back to that smaller church. There was just too much going on there, and we didn't want to revisit. It just probably wouldn't have been very healthy for us. So we started going to the other one, the college group, and we just went Sunday nights, and that was it. And but that was a step in the right direction.
Right.
We started going to, off and on, we'd go to life groups. They would start up, and then they would be for a couple weeks or a couple months, and then they'd fade out, and then we wouldn't go for a little while, and then we'd pick up another one that started.
Right.
And when I went back, it was completely different. I was like, when I go back, I got to do this differently. I've got to really discover what being a Christian is all about. And it was weird. It was a different mindset.
Right.
So when I went in, I was the opposite. And instead of listening to the sermon, taking it all in and going, okay, I'm going to apply this to my life, I'm going to go out there and share it with everybody, it was more of all all right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to listen to what he has to say as if I've never been to church before, and try to look at this at, from the viewpoint of somebody that's in the world, and really try to figure out what this means for me and for myself, and try to actually, figure it out on my own rather than just let the pastor tell me what it means,
Yeah.
And when I went in, I was very skeptical. Sometimes I may have been too skeptical, but I was very just cautious about it. It might sound like the wrong attitude in some ways, but it's what I needed, and it's how I think God really just revealed himself to me in a way that I'd never seen him before. So when I went back and I just started listening, I realized that there were some things that the pastor talked about that I didn't necessarily agree with. And what I mean by that is I didn't necessarily, I don't know how this, it was more of, I don't want to say I didn't agree with. I just didn't, the way that it was being taught, or the way that it was being interpreted, or the way that he was saying, that it should apply or whatever, I was kind of, it wasn't always, it was just sometimes, and I mean, a good example, well, I'll get into the example later because it's it's farther down the road, but I realized that, everybody's kind of got their own walk with God, their own faith with God. If you're a Christian, really that means that you have a relationship with God, and what he wants from you is not all your, he doesn't want you to just walk around wearing Christian t-shirts all the time and putting the Jesus sticker on the back of your car and, telling everybody just nonstop about him. Not that those are bad things, but that's not what it means to be a Christian. Being a Christian means you have a relationship with God. And when I discovered, I knew all the popular verses. And when I went back and I reread this verse, and I heard it, everything just kind of clicked, and it was like, this is what I've been missing. Matthew 22:37-40, very famous, passage in the Bible. Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus, and they ask him what the greatest commandment is, and he replies, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commands." And that's where everything just came together for me, and was like, it's all about your heart. If you love God and you love people, all the other things that you're supposed to do as a Christian are just going to come naturally. And I was so worried about being this perfect Christian and, giving off this perfect example and stuff growing up, that I missed the whole fact that if I just follow God and loved people, that everything else would.
That's the best example there is.
Fall into place. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, that just really changed my perspective, of everything. And I realized that, you look at, here's an example. I was trying to think of a good example. So, you look at all the different denominations of Christianity, right? And really, when it all comes down to it, it's just the way different people worship God, the way they interpret different parts of the Bible, things like that. But when it comes down to it, they have the same core belief that, we're sinners, we're separated from God. Jesus took that punishment for us. He rose from the dead and conquered, death and conquered sin. And we choose to accept God and follow God and ask God to forgive us. That's the core, the gospel. That's the gospel. Yep. And as long as they believe that, and this verse right here, love God, love people, then that's all that matters. Everything else is just kind of, God may speak to you a little different in an area than he speaks to me. Exactly. You may feel one way on a topic that I feel a little different on another. But as long as these core values are there, that's what matters. So that helped me be less critical in church and more open to just hearing different styles of preaching and different sermons. We actually started going to church after we got married that was closer to our house, and it's what we needed. It was a church where the pastor was really philosophical or theological. He really thought things out, and he did a great job just kind of explaining the context of the Bible and the different actual translations for the different words and whatnot, so that you could kind of piece together passages on your own, rather than him being up there just telling you what they were.
Right.
He gave you all the tools so that you could really listen to it and let God tell you what it meant, you know? And it was, I still listen to his sermons online because I haven't found a preaching style that's like that from anywhere else. I mean, not that I don't like other preaching styles, but I get a lot out of his sermons. So I still listen to him online. And I listen to a lot of other pastors online. I know I mentioned in my intro that there were, having the ability to listen to podcasts, there were a lot of resources out there. And my story continues where I'm constantly learning more and trying to figure it out on my own more. And part of that is finding different pastors. I mean, almost every church is on iTunes now. Yeah. So you can find them on a same way you're listening to this, on iTunes or your podcast app, or even just online, going to their website. And I find different ones all over the place that I like. And then the Bible Project, I don't know if you've heard of that, but that is an amazing resource. If you have never been to the BibleProject.org, you need to go today. There is video after video after video. He breaks down the whole Bible from beginning to end and just lays out the complete story from Genesis to Revelations, and puts it in like 8-minute videos where it's like a whiteboard style drawing, but it's done on a scroll. But it's that same style, and it is incredible. I mean, you can go through the whole Bible in like, I think it's like 5 or 6 hours. So, I mean, probably not what you're going to do on a Saturday or Sunday. But, you could watch a few here and there. And I've gone through them all. And it's, gives you just such a clear perspective of what the actual story of the Bible is. And then that same pastor has a podcast called My Strange Bible, which is fairly new. But it's his last like 10 years of teachings and sermons where he just gets more into letting you decipher the Bible on your own and try to figure out, the context of what everything is. Right. So, I mean, that really this whole story led me to that. It's where I just can't get enough trying to learn this stuff on my own. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. See, where was I? I had it in my notes. Going back to like the beginning of your story, I thought it was really cool that your parents wanted you to answer those questions in order for them to, tell you that you can get baptized. I think that's awesome. Yeah. Because obviously it means so much more when you can explain why you want to do this. Yeah. And so I'm sure that you've taken that into your parenting now with your kids and how you raise them and tell them everything. I didn't even know that like infant baptism wasn't a thing until I started coming here, because Justin, growing up Catholic, got baptized as a baby. My dad is Mexican. He got baptized as a baby. So I don't know. I just thought that was like the standard thing. And then I came here and it was like, like they need to decide on their own. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. On that note, my parents, like I'll brag about them all day long. They are great. And they even told, they led by example. Everything they did was by example. There was not much. I mean, they put their foot down, obviously, in times when they need to. Otherwise, they wouldn't be good parents. But they led by example for the most part. And I remember even them telling me at one point when I was old enough to stay home that if I didn't want to go to church anymore, I didn't have to. Like, nobody was forcing me to go. They wanted it to be a decision that I made. And, that was after I was baptized and everything. But, they probably knew I had too much fun at church. I had a lot of friends there. But, if they never forced that on me. And I see that happen in the church too much. I think too many parents try to force God on their kids. And I've seen it go really, really bad. Where, I told you I experienced a little bit of freedom, but the kids that actually live a super sheltered life, when they experience that freedom, they take it the exact opposite way. So, and it's tough as a parent. You look at your kids and you're like, hey, I want, this is a big deal, but you can't force it on them. Right.
That reminds me, have you ever been on the Right Now Media?
Yes.
So the Galatians study by Kyle Idleman, that study is awesome. And they're just quick, like 8 to 10 minute long videos. But in one of the videos, he had talked about how somebody came up to him, and their daughter was like 19 or 20, I think. And grew up in church, grew up doing everything right. And then all of a sudden, as soon as she graduated and was out on her own, completely left the church, became an atheist, like did all these other things. And he's like, I was waiting for this guy to tell me, you know, or ask me like, gosh, like, what did we do wrong? Like, where did we go wrong with raising her and everything? And he's like, but he told me our problem was that we raised her in church, but we didn't raise her in Christ.
Oh yeah.
And that just hit me like so powerful, like to how I want to like raise my kids, and I'm sure you with your kids, you know, like it's a relationship. It's not a ritual on what you do. It's not repetitive. It's not a set of rules, you know, like wearing Christian t-shirts and listening to the music and stuff. It's your relationship, it's your convictions, it's the Holy Spirit walking with you and guiding with you. Yeah. And so I just think that's so cool. And I think it's so powerful in your story that, one, it was God that told you why it hurt so bad. Yeah. And two, I think it was powerful because so many people relate to that, because so many people get hurt in the church. You know, people will expect them to be basically like the model of Jesus, you know. Yeah. I think with it being God that told you why it hurts so bad, and not because like sometimes you could like listen to a sermon or read a book or something and it'll hit you and be like, oh my gosh, like that's what I do. Like this is where I'm going wrong. But I think because it was God that like that had to come from God. Yeah. Otherwise that would have defeated the purpose of your whole lesson. Yeah. You know, if it came from another person. Right. So I don't know. I just thought that was really cool. Your scripture at the end, like, don't you love like a scripture that you've read so many times and then all of a sudden one day it's just like neon lights like jumping out at you on your page? Yeah. I love that feeling. Yeah. I actually had a little bit of that this morning in there. Yeah. Because the second part of my testimony is I'll share that eventually. That's more recent. I mean, within the last couple of months, I had an epiphany. No, like God got my attention, and I took a leap of faith, and it's incredible what happened after that. But listening, part of that deals with money and me being so focused on trying to provide for my family all the time and losing control or losing focus on what was important. And when he, you know, for those of you that haven't listened to the sermon yet from this morning, he talked about you know, giving to, when the Pharisees asked Jesus if they should pay taxes, and he said to give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, because his picture was on the, you know, or whose image is on the coin, you know, and they said Caesar's, and he said give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. What hit me when I listened to that was like, I've never realized that right there, like, money is of this world. It's a worldly thing, you know, and I mean, we know that, but it's right. I've never picked that out of the scripture before, you know? Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. It's just fun when you see stuff like that. And the pastor was talking about even how he, you know, with them trying to kind of give him that compliment before. Yeah, the flattery. You know, the flattery, yeah. I mean, when I was in sales, that's one of the sales techniques that you do. Like, you know, you give them a compliment and you tell them, oh, I noticed that, you know, you're smart with this or you're that, and, you know, and it gets them to, like he said, drop their guard. And he noticed that. This is the first time he's noticed that that was cool. So it's funny. Just those little nuggets of truth. And it's just changes like your whole perspective. And I don't know. It's cool. Anyway, well, I think that's it. I know we've got Justin. I know when I talked to him, he said probably next week he would do his. So just make sure, we'll probably hear his next week. And then I know, you said you had a friend that was interested maybe in giving hers. My friend Stacy. And then I was approached by someone in the church as well today that wants to share theirs. So we'll just keep it coming. And I'm going to get this more on the announcements and stuff this week. I didn't make a slide for it or make sure it was in the video announcements or in the bulletin, but I'm going to make sure this week. So, if you guys want to share your testimony, we'd love to hear it and let people, know your story. Just reach out to me at valleychristianfellowship@yahoo.com, or you can just, catch me at church. So, until then, I guess have a good week. Bye, guys.